the immortal Belgian bodybuilder Jean-Claude Van Damme, the one who used to hold everyone's breath. There were the well-known twins from Double Impact, Kurt Sloan from Kickboxer, and Frank Dux from Bloodsport. He was more than just a famous actor. He was a living reminder of the greatest martial arts films ever produced in Hollywood. A legend, and a raging storm of grace and strength. A human body could not split like his did. His piercing eyes and powerful kicks from the 1980s and 1990s will live on in people's memories forever. His name has gained notoriety. However, beneath the dazzling lights and raucous applause were wounds that would never go away. He had 5 failed marriages, was betrayed, nearly died of an addiction. His honor was tarnished by scandals, and his heroes are still plagued by darkness. Van Damme is no longer fighting for fame at the age of 63. The chapter he must deal with is more difficult than any role he has ever played. A warrior with unhealing scars. The pain that haunts him cannot be concealed by any amount of light. He never shares the secrets that lie behind those eyes, though. Which wounds are still painful? Not a sound? You will always remember the answers, which are depressing and terrifying. If you still admire the legend who ruled the world, hit like right now. An homage to a fighter whose most significant battles took place in real life rather than on screen. Behind the man who could kick mountains, there lived a frail soul. It waged silent battles against helplessness, terror, and the vile reverberation of laughter that left invisible wounds. Born in Berchem-Saint-Agathe, a peaceful neighborhood close to Brussels, on October 18, 1960, Jean-Claude Van Damme was actually Jean-Claude Camille François van Varenberg. Eugène, his father, was a bookkeeper who used numbers to keep things organized. His mother, Eliana, was a flower who brought a lot of color to their modest house. Veronique, his sister, was his only friend. At first glance, life appeared to be normal. However, he was devastated by what he saw in the mirror. A skinny boy with large glasses was ridiculed as a pity 4 eyes, a person who has dreams but is confined by a body that isn't strong enough to support them. He recalled feeling ashamed as he stood and gazed at his picture when he was 11 years old. He promised to alter his own story's conclusion. His early battles were fought in his heart, rather than in a ring, against ridicule, uncertainty, and the deafening silence that weighed more than words. His father enrolled him in the Centre National de Karate with Master Claude Guts because he sensed the storm within him. After 4 years of intense training, Jean-Claude became accustomed to being disciplined. After earning a black belt in Shotokan karate at the age of 18, he joined the Belgian national team. At last, he discovered how to use shame and fear to accomplish goals. However, strength was insufficient. He chose ballet in spite of being ridiculed. He was stronger, more graceful, and more balanced than he could have ever dreamed after 5 years of arduous work on the bar. "Ballet is the hardest," he would say after many years. "If you can get through a dance workout, you can handle anything." To complete the transformation and transform the feeble boy into a man of steel, he resorted to bodybuilding. Everyone paid attention in 1978 when he claimed to be Mr. Belgium. But more significant than the prizes were the items he had won inside. Have faith. He was having a rough night and was around 12 years old. He entered a church by himself and uttered 3 unfulfillable wishes: to stay safe, to save the world, and to become a famous movie star. For a lonely boy who was dying for light, they were lifelines despite their naivete. His soul was marked by these early battles, which were cruel, painful, and oddly beautiful. They also prepared him for a fate greater than he could have ever dreamed. From a small Belgian church to the harsh mirrors of a dance studio, from a broken pride to black belt discipline, Jean-Claude Van Damme was already preparing for the biggest fight of his life. The darkness within him and the harsh reality of the world that he would never be enough were depicted on the screen instead of an enemy. Before leaving Belgium, he had cultivated his muscles through bodybuilding, dancing, and karate. His strength was insufficient to shield him from what America had in store. A broken accent, a dream larger than their bodies, and just $3,000 brought Jean-Claude Van Damme and his friend Michel Chi to the United States in 1982. He was just another unidentified foreigner staring at a city that didn't give a damn about his life or death. It was a long way from Hollywood. He slept in the back seat of a beaten car at night. His breath had caused the windows to fog and the seats to tear. He couldn't sleep because he was so hungry. He later acknowledged that, rather than acting in defiance, he did steal food, an apple here, a sandwich there, out of desperation, the kind of desperation that leaves you feeling hollow on the inside. He knocked on studio doors and walked the streets for months without anyone answering. There were more than 100 tryouts, according to some, and they all ended the same way. A kind grin, a headshake, or worse, giggling at his English slurred speech. Each rejection was as painful as a knife. When the phone was silent after that, it wasn't just quiet. He might never fit in again after receiving that sentence. Nevertheless, despite his hunger, he made himself split, train, and stretch every morning. He continued until his legs ached. He always imagined that his dream would be realized. "Thank you ahead of time for my success." He later acknowledged that believing was crazy, but that was all he had. He told God this every day. Upon arriving in America, he was treated like any other stranger. Despite being ridiculed in Belgium as a pity for eyes, the discipline of his body, the only language he could still speak flawlessly, was the only thing that remained constant. He earned money by working wherever he could be hired, delivering pizzas, installing parquet flooring, operating limousines, and even serving as a bouncer at Chuck Norris's bar, Woody's Wharf. The fact that they were protecting strangers at night while they fantasized about fighting villains in movies was hilarious. Nevertheless, he continued to come and smile and hold out his hands, confident that someone would eventually notice. In 1984's Break-In, he appeared on screen as a background dancer whose splits were mostly invisible. He became a member of Chuck Norris's stunt crew for the film Missing in Action that same year. Although the job didn't pay well, it demonstrated his ability to work hard for the camera. Getting the break was never easy. When he played the Russian villain Ivan in No Retreat, No Surrender in 1986, he at last got a role with a name and a face. After years of rain, the small, badly made film felt like a welcome victory. He was no longer a hungry child in the back of a car. He appeared on television. These years weren't particularly exciting. They were cruel. Poverty, humiliation, and a dreadful sense of isolation are all consequences of exile. He battled those individuals. However, the intensity of that battle gave him the toughness that would later make him the muscles from Brussels. Every night spent in that car was a scar, and every rejection was a cut. Nevertheless, each one contributed to the creation of a story. With nothing but his desire for companionship, he had once spent the nights shivering in the back seat of a wrecked car. After being ridiculed for his accent, he left the casting rooms after stealing food to soothe his stomach. He was told he would never fit in after being rejected more than 100 times. But in 1988, things took a different turn for him. One of the 3 impossible dreams that the terrified boy who had knelt in a Belgian church and whispered now came true. Jean-Claude Van Damme shot to fame in the film Bloodsport. On screen, he portrayed Frank Dux in a covert competition. But in reality, he was fighting for every chilly night, every slammed door, and every taunt that implied he wasn't present. Despite only costing $1.5 million, The Immigrant with Broken English became a global sensation, and the most talked about action film ever. Later he would confess, "When Bloodsport came out, I cried because the little boy in Belgium was finally shown." For the first time, he was no longer a ghost, thanks to the raucous applause and bright lights. The road to success was not an easy one. Like a wave, it crashed down. A drunk dancer exploding into a split kick is a timeless image, and Kickboxer went from having a modest budget to becoming a $50 million hit. A series of films followed. Both Death Warrant and Lionheart were huge hits that demonstrated his versatility. With Double Impact, the story became more expansive. Van Damme in opposition to Van Damme. It's both tough and beautiful. Then he was placed directly beside Dolph Lundgren in Universal Soldier, a vicious battle that brought him international fame and over $100 million. Then Time Cop emerged victorious. The theaters made over $100 million. Critics were silenced when Max Walker demonstrated a man who could shatter hearts and bones. For a moment, the world saw the frail dreamer behind the brawler. He even frightened video games. Mortal Kombat's Johnny Cage was designed to resemble him, down to the swagger and lettering. There was much more to Jean-Claude Van Damme than just being a movie star. It was reshaped by him. But the glitz was already giving way to the cruel irony. He was now restrained by golden chains from the dream that had once kept him from starvation and humiliation. "I was working too much, going from set to set and being tired," Van Damme later admitted when he was exhausted. "I was unable to comprehend how my family's notoriety had once saved me, but was now gradually consuming me." Before the next camera even rolled, he was already bruised from the unrelenting schedule. The cheers were louder than his own heartbeat. and city after city blended into one continuous set. His eyes darkened with shadows that no makeup could cover up behind the $1,000,000 smile. At home, where empty chairs spoke louder than applause, the cheers of millions were insufficient to fill the silence at his own dinner table. His children sensed his absence, his marriages grew strained, and rumors circulated on set. Arrivals late, champagne-hazed nights, the picture of a man sprinting away from exhaustion that went beyond his body's capacity. Now, like a cruel weight, the very salvation that had freed him from a freezing car seat was pressing down on his shoulders. Once his greatest ally, fame had become a master who showed no mercy, hesitation, or compassion. He had climbed the mountain for which, as a shaky boy in a Belgian church, he had prayed. However, a shadow is cast by every mountain. Darker battles waited in that shadow. He would never be able to win battles that no choreography, spotlight, or applause could script. And now they were after him. The heart may be the site of the most vicious conflict. He married Maria Rodriguez in 1980 when he was only 20 years old, and she provided him with the security and love of a peaceful life in Belgium. Their marriage appeared to stabilize him for a brief period of time, reminding him that love and warmth could exist outside of training, trophies, and restless ambition. However, Jean-Claude's eyes were focused on a horizon that stretched well beyond Brussels. In his mind, the lights of Hollywood glowed with an allure that was too strong to ignore, and gradually, the fire of his obsession clashed with the vows he had made. Maria was left behind when he decided to leave Europe in 1982, with just a suitcase and a dream. Not because he was malicious, but rather because his path could not accommodate two people. The strain of distance, absence, and a dream that demanded everything caused their 4-year marriage, which was never blessed with children, to fall apart. As if loving him meant being in the midst of an uncontrollable storm, Maria would later characterize life with him as intolerable. It was a heavy and unshakable realization for Jean-Claude. It was the first injury his dream had caused to a loved one. His initial foray into Hollywood had been filled with heartache. The first sacrifice made at the altar of his ambition was that young and precarious marriage. Every whispered prayer for fame and glory in that Belgian church would have a hidden cost. It was a bitter lesson written in silence and separation. Not only was Maria Rodriguez his first wife, but she also served as the first indication that there would always be losses associated with success. The lesson was not finished, though. The price of fame continued to rise. Cynthia Darien would be the next to take the brunt of it. With just $3,000 in his pocket, he fled his first marriage in Belgium and traveled across the ocean to pursue the dream of fame. He managed to make ends meet in Los Angeles by taking odd jobs as a pizza delivery boy and a bouncer. He met Cynthia Darien, a young woman from a wealthy American family, here, far from Brussels, who seemed to represent the security and comfort he had left behind when he left Europe. Their 1985 wedding appeared to many as a happy second chance for a man to finally pursue his dreams. Once derided as a little 4 eyes, the Brussels muscles are now marrying into privilege and love in the city he so desperately wanted to take over. For a brief instant, it appeared that he had found equilibrium, the comfort of home to balance out the harsh lights of Hollywood. However, the truth was much more brutal. He was blinded by the lights of Hollywood. His silent vows were overshadowed by the thunderous promise of stardom. Jean-Claude had only one obsession: making it, no matter what the cost. At home, that hunger, the same fire that had once saved him, became a cruel master. Later, Cynthia would make one heartbreaking admission that would encapsulate her suffering. Van Damme only loved himself, so living with him was a living hell. Her words revealed the truth he could not deny, cutting like a blade. His quest for fame was gradually suffocating the love he had discovered. Their hurried and brittle marriage lasted only a year. The echo of what might have been was all that held them together. There were no kids. This was more than just a divorce for Van Damme. It was the first gruesome indication that blood sacrifices were already being demanded in his dream. He had escaped the sneers that had once broken his spirit and poverty. But he was losing something even more valuable in his pursuit of Hollywood's glittering promise: the straightforward possibility of a family, a home, and enduring love. Not only was Cynthia his second wife, she was the first sign, the first caution that the shadows would grow more ruthless the brighter his star burned. Jean-Claude Van Damme appeared untouchable during the height of his meteoric rise, when the lights of Hollywood were brighter than ever. However, life tends to attack where defenses are weakest. Still reeling from Bloodsport's victory, he married Gladys Portugues in 1987. Gladys was a former bodybuilder and fitness champion whose warmth was equaled only by her strength. He sensed for the first time the tenuous promise of a home. That same year, their son Christopher was born, and on his birthday in 1990, their daughter Bianca arrived, an almost poetic gift, as though destiny was rewarding the boy who, at the age of 12, prayed for a family, a purpose, and a bright future in a quiet Belgian church. Van Damme was now living the dream for the world, a family man and an action hero. However, the foundation was being split by cracks behind the glossy magazine covers. His time, body, and soul were all demanded by Hollywood. He was absent and broken by the schedules, and temptation infiltrated those voids. Even worse, his own decisions caused more damage than any blow from an opponent. There were infidelity rumors. He had never delivered a roundhouse kick, but this betrayal went much deeper. Gladys could not stand it. Suddenly, the strong woman who had supported him, given birth to 2 children, and provided the stability he once prayed to God for, was betrayed. Their marriage ended in 1992 after 5 years of marriage, and the woman who had been his rock left, taking with her the children's laughter that had once filled their home. It was a devastating blow to Van Damme, a heartbreak that made him face an unavoidable truth. The very love he had once prayed to protect was the price of his dream, regardless of how much money he made or how loudly the world applauded. The fighter who had won the battle on screen was losing the one that really counted, the battle to keep his family intact, as the cameras continued to roll. Years later, he would reflect on that loss with an uncommon tenderness in his voice, acknowledging the anguish of watching his kids grow up without him. The man who could kick bricks found that the most devastating blow was not visible. It was observing the family he had imagined slipping away from him. It was an unfortunate turn of events. His chance at enduring love had been snatched away by the dream that had once kept him from loneliness. However, this was just the start. There were still more sinister storms in the distance. When he sought comfort once more, the memories of his broken vows with Maria and his brief, flaming collapse with Cynthia had hardly subsided. The peace he had been seeking since Belgium appeared to be offered by the beauty and promise of stability of Darcy Lapierre, a radiant former Miss Hawaii. They were married in 1994 under Bangkok's tropical skies, and for a brief instant, it seemed as though he had at last understood the life he had prayed for as a young boy in a church pew who was shaking. Family, fame, and now the flimsy prospect of salvation. Nicholas, their son, was born a year later. And the sound of a second chance, the living evidence that maybe all the sacrifices had not been in vain, should have been his first cries, the purest response to those prayers. However, Van Damme was still in the midst of a storm. It was merely accumulating power. With each premiere, after-party, and hotel room where loneliness and celebrity met, Hollywood's temptations grew louder. Rumors quickly swept through the tabloids. Rumors of another affair with model Isabelle Fortea, and an alleged affair with pop star Kylie Minogue during the Street Fighter filming. Not all rumors were fueled by the headlines. The same betrayals that had already shattered his relationship with Gladys were reflected in them. Young and proud, Darcy could not bear the pain. The woman who had given birth to his son abruptly left to wonder if love could ever defeat the hunger of fame. Already shaky, the marriage disintegrated in bitter accusations and a blaze of cameras. In public, Darcy charged Van Damme with being unstable and having a love that could only cause pain rather than protection. By 1997, it was over, and their breakup turned into one of the most significant scandals in his life. However, Nicholas was the one who hurt him more than losing another wife or being humiliated in the media. When Van Damme lost custody of Nicholas, he discovered a silence worse than any review from a critic. The silence of a household where the absence of a child's laughter had taken its place. He asked, "Not seeing my son?" in a cracked voice years later. It broke me. He was truly broken by this blow. With a single kick, he could destroy brick walls, but he was unable to destroy the barrier separating him and his son. The cruelest irony remained. Trophy cases were filling up while his house was becoming empty. He was referred to as a legend in magazines, but his legacy at home was written without him. Hollywood continued to applaud the Brussels muscles, but a father who was troubled by his loss was visible behind the cameras. At one point, he believed that fame would save him, but it had taken away the love he prayed to keep safe. Night after night, that absence continued to gnaw at him, No praise could drown a wound that no spotlight could cover. He was pushed toward the abyss, toward addictions and scandals that would test not only the fighter on screen, but also the frail soul still imprisoned within. As the lights of Hollywood grew brighter and brighter, no trophy could heal the wound caused by losing Nicholas, and shadows darker than any adversary Jean-Claude Van Damme had ever encountered slithered into that void. The man who used to split the sky with his kicks was now up against an enemy that resided in his mind, soul, and veins. Rumors of drugs had already followed him by the early 1990s. However, those murmurs turned into screams following the dissolution of his fourth marriage. A lesser man might die from consuming up to 10 grams per day, according to some reports. His once steel-like body was now slowly rusting with despair. Years later, when he had lost his bluster, he would quietly confess, "I believed I was unbeatable. I was overdosing. I was losing myself." The lights were blazing, the costumes were glittering, and the cameras were demanding perfection on the Street Fighter set in 1994. But chaos was brewing behind the curtains. Drawn into the trough of addiction, Van Damme disappeared for days at a time. For those who watched him stumble, it was evident that the man Hollywood had praised as unstoppable was burning out frame by frame, even though the movie made money. Subsequently, the courts turned private suffering into public disgrace. Jackson Pinckney lost one eye due to a stunt accident. Although a settlement of almost $500,000 was ordered, Van Damme's conscience was burdened with the real cost. An error that no action sequence could correct. Then, in 1997, he was hauled into court on a claim of stolen script by Frank Dux, the very martial artist whose story had made him famous. Despite Van Damme's victory, the headlines conveyed a different message. A fallen hero, betrayal, and greed. The blows continued to fall. He was flattened in front of onlookers by actor and biker Chuck Zito in a packed New York bar that same year. The humiliation of being struck down in public became global tabloid fodder for the man who smashed giants on screen. The myth of invincibility was being eroded by each headline. Once eager to crown him, Hollywood started to back off. Van Damme rivaled Jim Carrey at his height, demanding $20 million per picture. Contracts were lost, studios objected, and the term blacklisted infiltrated like a death sentence. He was left stranded in silence as the tidal wave of stardom subsided. And the abyss opened in that silence. Van Damme acknowledged that he considered ending it all while alone in a hotel room in Hong Kong. The boy, who had prayed for glory and purpose in a Belgian church, now gazed into emptiness, prepared to give up. This could never be scripted by a fight choreography. The sound of his own despair was too loud to be muffled by applause. The spiral eventually led him into flashing police lights in 1999. His glossy posters from his prime have been replaced by a mugshot after he was arrested for driving under the influence. It was unimaginable to fans. It was evidence to Van Damme that the hero they loved was no longer there. Only a ghost stumbling through the rubble of his own mythology. The dream that had saved him from starvation, loneliness, and mockery had robbed him of almost everything else that made life worthwhile. This was the cruelest irony. Once heralded as Brussels' immortal muscles, Jean-Claude Van Damme now served as evidence that even myths can falter. Shadowed by darkness that no spotlight could ever dispel, nevertheless, a truth greater than himself carried him down. Without equilibrium, that glory is like a cage. That unbridled ambition has the power to devour the very soul it was intended to preserve. There was now quiet at home for every cheer that had previously rocked the theaters. There was a vacant seat at the family table for each trophy shining behind glass. It is a warning that is expressed in heartbreak as well as headlines, that the most perilous delusion of all is success without peace. However, every real fighter understands that a loss is never final. The will to get back up after falling is more important than the actual fall. The prospect of redemption lingered, not as his wealth or notoriety, but as the opportunity to reclaim the myth's creator. If only he could reach for it and make it through the long night. Although the fall had been cruel, the truth that no headline could convey was what made it intolerable. Jean-Claude Van Damme was battling a mental storm in addition to the outside world. Doctors finally gave the disorder a name in the late 1990s, bipolar disorder. He had been oscillating between extremes for years. Lows so debilitating that getting out of bed felt like lifting a mountain, and manic episodes where he could train for 20 hours straight without sleep. Convinced he was unstoppable, he had been pulled further into cycles of euphoria and despair by addiction, which had only served to fuel that fire. Beneath the spotlight, his life was being subtly shaped by an illness rather than fame. The diagnosis had two sides. It was liberating in its explanation and devastating in its revelation. It explained the upheaval that had cost him friends, marriages, and almost his career. However, it also offered him an opportunity to defend himself. Medication to soothe the chemical storms in his brain and therapy that made him face the shadows he had long shunned were the first steps in the fight for recovery. The return to discipline followed. The same bodybuilding, karate, and ballet that had once made a frail boy into a warrior. They weren't about getting ready for the next film right now. They were survival in and of themselves. Every kick, every stretch, and every drop of perspiration turned into a prayer, an appeal to take back the man he was losing. The montage wasn't heroic. There were days of uncertainty, nights of trembling, and weeks when it seemed easier to give up than to persevere. He faltered. He relapsed. Silently, he bled. However, every time he pushed himself back up, he gradually and painfully escaped. Van Damme stopped using drugs by the early 2000s, and his bipolar disorder improved with consistent treatment. Although it wasn't cured, it was controlled, allowing him to resume his life, career, and romantic relationships. The man who had been commended for using his legs to smash bricks was now learning to rebuild himself piece by fragile piece. He subsequently stated, "I would not have survived without discipline." And something unexpected occurred during that battle. Van Damme tore down another wall. This time, it took place in the stigma associated with mental health, rather than in a dojo or on a movie set. His candor reassured his followers, who had previously believed he was untouchable, by demonstrating that strength is not the absence of weakness, but rather the bravery to confront it. Jean-Claude Van Damme had walked back, facing the abyss. His spirit remained unbroken despite the scars on his body and the shadows in his mind. The most difficult battles he had demonstrated weren't on screens or in competitions. Within the self, they are silently fought, and by making it through them, he found a triumph bigger than any box office accolade. The evidence that recovery is feasible, redemption is real, and even legends are people. After Hollywood had essentially carved his gravestone, Jean-Claude Van Damme started to rise again, not with a kick, but with a confession, from the ashes of scandal and despair. In JCVD 2008, he broke the fourth wall with a 6-minute monologue that ended with him sobbing candidly, stepping out of the myth and into his true humanity. The action star, the unbeatable fighter, and the muscles from Brussels were not being watched by audiences for the first time. A broken man pleading to be understood was what they were witnessing. There was no choreography. It was the truth. Time magazine deemed it worthy of an Oscar. It was dubbed unforgettable by millions. There was more to that moment than a performance. It was a resurrection. After years of darkness, the first glimmer of light. What came next were pieces of a soul returning, not just movies. His reputation was revived in the films Universal Soldier 2009, Regeneration 2009, and Day of Reckoning 2012, which demonstrated that the warrior was still within him. He appeared on screen as a villain in The Expendables 2, 2012, so compelling that reviewers muttered, "Van Damme never left." Statues began to appear in Munich, Azerbaijan, and Brussels, not to commemorate the scandals, but to pay tribute to the symbol, the man who immortalized the split kick. The Volvo truck ad went viral in 2013. He was balancing between two giants in motion, his legs perfectly split, his body poetry in motion, his spirit transcending time. He made fun of himself even in 2016 and 2017 with Jean-Claude Van Johnson, transforming his own legend into satire and receiving recognition for his humility rather than his strength. This was reinvention rather than a resurgence. However, the most authentic act of resurrection took place in the delicate chamber of his own heart, not in a studio. Gladys Portugues, the woman he had betrayed but never stopped loving, was the object of his return in 1999. Bianca and Christopher were the two children she had given him. She had also given him a home, which was the one thing Hollywood could never right. It was not a happy reunion. It was a daily decision to mend the damage caused by fame, a fight for forgiveness. Even in 2015, when divorce papers threatened to end the chapter once more, they opted for reconciliation over ruin and love over pride. She is still there today, not as a shadow of his fame, but as the love that saved him from himself and the lighthouse that rescued him from the abyss. The resurrection that mattered most was this one, not box office figures, not bronze statues, but the quiet, defiant power of love, forgiveness, and the rediscovery of family. Jean-Claude Van Damme remains a man who refused to give up, rather than a perfect hero, despite storms, scandals, broken promises, and broken headlines. And because of that rejection, his story grew beyond fame and beyond the realm of film. It turned into a testament etched in ash and fire that redemption is still possible even when you are rejected by society, have your name erased, and your spirit in ruins. At 63, Jean-Claude Van Damme lives in a more subdued light that carries discipline, dignity, and the weight of everything he has been through, rather than the blinding glare of frequent premieres. His empire, which was created through decades of blockbusters, international tours, and endorsements that preserved his reputation even during the years when Hollywood closed, is thought to be worth about $40 million today. Stability, which he once lacked most, is the foundation of much of that fortune. He owns a multi-million-dollar Mediterranean-style home in Los Angeles, complete with sunlit courtyards, terracotta roofs, and a private gym where he still starts his days with weightlifting, splits, and stretches. He keeps a home in his birthplace of Brussels that connects him to his heritage, a peaceful area adorned with family photos that serve as a reminder of the glasses-wearing boy who once prayed for fame in a Belgian church. Additionally, he constructed a hillside retreat with a view of the harbor in Hong Kong, the city that initially welcomed him as a global celebrity. He now returns there for peace after having previously fled the storm of fame. These are more than just real estate. They serve as symbols of survival. Every iron gate, marble floor, and meticulously maintained garden represents a silent victory over the many evenings he spent curled up in the back seat of a wrecked car, stealing food to get by each day. Today, he is accompanied by thankfulness rather than haughtiness as he moves through the hallways of his houses. His family will never experience the loneliness, the cold, or the hunger that once threatened to destroy him because of the life he has created. And that might be his greatest triumph more than any award or salary. But it's not all about wealth. He now protects his health with monastic discipline, after it was almost destroyed by addiction and untreated illness. He was given a bipolar disorder diagnosis in the late 1990s, and he has spent decades learning how to control it with medicine, counseling, and most importantly, the physical discipline that has always saved his life. He continues to train daily, lifting iron, balancing on bars, maintaining his renowned splits with quiet precision, stretching until his body lengthens like a bowstring, and moving with a grace that belies his advanced age. The focus of the training has shifted from cameras to survival and mental health. He follows a strict diet that includes vegetables, lean proteins, water, and no alcohol. He frequently discusses meditation and martial arts as spiritual remedies and evidence that a warrior's battle never ends. All it does is change form. However, age dictates its own course. Van Damme acknowledges that the quiet of loss, rather than the waning of celebrity, is the most difficult aspect of aging. He missed spending those years with his son, Nicholas. When he sees his children as adults, regret reverberates in his heart. Even though he is still strong, his body is stiff from years of fighting. Achy joints and muscles that don't go away on their own. Time has etched lines on the once immaculate face that was once carved like marble under studio lights. However, those lines are beautiful in and of themselves. They're not defects. They are a sign that you have survived. Evidence that a man has survived, stumbled, fallen, risen, and persevered. Age cannot put out the fire that burns in those eyes, which are still sharp beneath the worn skin. A reminder that legends never go away, even if they crease. Gladys Portugues, the woman he once betrayed, lost and eventually found his way back to, remains his anchor at home. They have weathered storms together that few marriages could. And through them, they brought up Christopher and Bianca, two kids who now exhibit their father's strength and charm in different ways. They opted for forgiveness over finality in 2015, when divorce papers threatened to end their journey once more. Gladys is more than just his wife now. She is a living example of how even the most broken paths can lead back to love, and that daily decisions are what truly define redemption. A will is not recorded in the public domain. At 63, however, Van Damme has talked about leaving a legacy that is not measured in material possessions or wealth, even though his home and fortune serve as reminders of the causes he championed, but rather in lessons learned via hardship, self-control, tenacity, and humility. In addition to millions, he has stated that he wants his kids to understand that even the most formidable fighters must yield to balance. These days, rhythm is more important to him than premieres, Long walks with his dogs, quiet meals at home, and disciplined training sessions. The stillness he had once believed was unattainable. Whether on movie sets, talk shows, or viral advertisements, he continues to be in front of the public, not to demonstrate his immortality, but to serve as a reminder that he is still alive, fighting, and standing. For supporters, Jean-Claude Van Damme is more than just the Brussels muscle. He's grown into something bigger, a reminder that there is always a way to get back up after falling a long time or rising to a great height. His wealth may be measured in millions, but his true riches are found in his forbearance, tenacity, the family that stayed, and the fact that he has survived storms that would have destroyed others.